Hello and welcome. My name is Mrs. Jolly. I am a teacher of religion, philosophy and ethics. I work in a secondary school and have the pleasure of teaching all year groups from year 7 right up to year 13. This presentation is focusing on the AQA GCSE Religious Studies specification. And this specific one is looking at those 12-mark questions. These are the ones that students absolutely dread. So let's have a look at how we can overcome the fear. First of all then, what is a 12-mark question? Well, whilst we refer to it as a question, it's actually a statement. It is something normally quite contentious, which is a good thing. Because it allows you to look at it in more detail, and I'll come to that later on. My example then is taken from theme E, the Religion, Crime and Punishment unit, and the example question or statement is capital punishment is the only suitable punishment for murder. Okay, the exam board didn't keep us in the dark. On the exam paper, you are given some helpful prompts, as I like to call them, of what you need to include. It says that you need to evaluate the statement and that in your answer, you should give reasoned arguments in support of the statement. In other words, you absolutely have to give some points that support the statement and give explanations for those. You should give reasoned arguments to support a different point of view. Now that could mean an opposing point of view or just a contrasting or a different point of view, something that isn't the same as the first viewpoint you used. It also says that you should refer to religious arguments. Well, it's not really a shocker. This is a GCSE in Religious Studies qualification, so it makes sense that you're going to have to refer to religion at some point. It does give you the option. It says you may, so in other words, it's not compulsory, but it gives you the option to refer to non-religious arguments. Now, depending on the statement you are given, will depend on how relevant that is, also what theme or what unit you are responding to. So think very carefully about whether that would be useful or not. And finally, it says you should reach a justified conclusion, and we'll look at more about what that means a little later on. First up then, the exam board, they say that this is what they want to see. They are looking for judgment. They're looking for justified conclusions. In other words, not just, I think this, the end, but a justification for that final conclusion. This means then, in order to be judging something, you need to think about the strengths and the weaknesses for all of your arguments, both for and against. That conclusion then has to have that reason. Why is one particular point, one argument, you've looked at its strengths and weaknesses, but why are you saying that still, the strengths still outweigh the weaknesses, that's still the best conclusion that you could come to? So the key skills that are being looked at here are those of analysis and evaluation. Those words can strike terror into some students, but do not be afraid. First of all, I like to think of what the key points or views are. So get your statement, make a little table. What are the key points? Then you can drill down, look at those key points individually. What makes that a strong point to make? What is a weakness of the point? So get your key points, then consider the strengths and weaknesses of each of them. Some will be easier to determine than others. Think about a religious teaching that you could use to support or oppose one of those points. So a religious teaching that you could use in addition to your other explanations to help develop the response. And finally, what is your personal final decision at the end of all of this, and why? Why are you saying that? Not just it is, that's what I'm saying, fact. Why? Justify it. Let's have a look at this example again then. So the statement, capital punishment is the only suitable punishment for murder. Let's have a look at some key points. I like to split these into for and against. Makes it easier when it comes to writing the answer. This is really good technique to use if you're planning as part of a lesson or as a homework, you're planning a response that you're going to write in your own time. Something that if you practice it enough, you can hone your skills and be able to do it quite quickly in an exam. So for retribution, one of the aims of punishment is retribution, getting your own back, having a sense of justice. So capital punishment would be seen to help to do that. It could be argued it protects the public. It's absolutely arguably the most effective in terms of protecting the public. There is no chance that this person will be released from prison early and then potentially reoffend or commit different crimes. They're dead. Capital punishment, the thought of it alone should act as a deterrent. Again, another aim of punishment. If the likelihood is that I get caught for committing a crime, that I'm going to be punished by being executed, it may make me think twice about committing the crime in the first place. A religious link, I've taken this one from Christianity, but obviously you're going to use them according to whatever religions you are studying. In the book of Exodus, in the Old Testament, I'm sure you're aware of the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. So that would seem to support the idea that if you murder somebody specifically, then a suitable punishment would be equal to that, which would be death. The other side of the coin then, the against. For some people, they say it's an easy way out, actually. Spending time in prison, having to think about what you have done, suffering, being locked up, seems a much more harsh punishment than a relatively quick and painless execution. There is no chance for anybody to reform, to look at what they've done, to learn from their mistake, to try and make amends if they have been executed. It's too final and therefore shouldn't be an option. Many people would suggest it's hypocritical. Telling somebody that they have committed a murder, they have taken a life, and that is wrong, and in order to punish them and to show other people that they are wrong, they are being executed. That's like me saying, you just punched somebody in the face, that's not good, you shouldn't punch people in the face, I'm now going to give you your punishment, which is being punched in the face. Hypocritical. Lastly, taken from famous Gandhi, he very famously said, an eye for an eye, linking directly to the Exodus quote, would leave the whole world blind. So in other words, if we take this kind of stance and punish in this way, it's ultimately not making the world a better place. People aren't learning from it. So it would go against capital punishment. Simply, keep your list of your key points, and now you see I've just changed it to strengths and weaknesses. So now I'm going to look at some of these points. I might look at them all, I might just consider one or two. So if I take from the for column, acts as a deterrent, I could say yes, that's really good. I'm not going to commit a crime because I don't want to be executed. That seems to support capital punishment. However, a lot of crimes that are committed, clearly not in the UK, because remember we don't use capital punishment here, but a lot of crimes that are committed where a life is taken, it isn't something that is necessarily premeditated. Or the person assumes they are not going to be caught, and therefore whatever the punishment is, it doesn't matter because they believe they're going to get away with it. If it really truly acted as a deterrent, countries that had capital punishment would see statistically a lower rate in offences like murder than countries like our own, where it is not the case. And that isn't a fact. It does not seem to make a difference on people murdering other people, for example. So that would be a way that I would look at the strengths and the weaknesses of one of the points. So you should do that for a couple of your points, and I'll look at how you can structure that. So there is no set guidance from the exam board, as long as you're discussing, analysing, evaluating the different sides to the argument and coming up with your justified conclusion. It's pretty much left to you. So here's a couple of suggestions. Lots of students that I have taught have found this one particularly helpful, especially early on in year 9 if you're starting your GCSE then, or in year 10. I like to call it on one hand, on the other hand. Okay, quite simple, 2 hands. On one hand, I'm going to make a point, I'm going to explain it, and this is my sentence starter. On one hand, capital punishment could be seen as acceptable. I'm going to explain that point, I'm going to evaluate it. It's a deterrent, or well, actually, my evaluation is going to look at the fact it isn't really a deterrent. My religious link I might draw from Exodus, talking about an eye for an eye and it seeming to be fair. Ideally, and remembering you've got time constraints in an exam situation, I want to do that twice, 2 points that would support the statement I'm given. And then quite simply, we move on the other hand. And I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to use one of the points of the other side of the argument, the against. I'm going to explain what that point is, what it means, how it links to the statement. I'm going to evaluate it, what are its strengths and weaknesses. If I can include a religious link, I'm absolutely going to. And again, I'm allowing 2 points. And then we have a conclusion. So we should be seeing a well-structured response that perhaps has 5 paragraphs, depending on how quick you can write your responses. So on one hand, this is my point I'm making, explain, evaluate, oh, I've managed to give a religious link to that one. I might include a second point in a second paragraph. Then on the other hand, 2 paragraphs, and then in conclusion. I'll talk about the conclusion a bit more in a moment. Alternatively, that might not suit you and you might want to use some other sentence starters and get used to using them and see how you can write it in a more discursive manner. So we might start with things like, some people would say that this is a point. Then make sure you're linking it in with a Christian or whatever religion you're studying belief. Explain what that means, explain how it supports the statement. Again, as I said, there's no specific way of doing this. I would make sure then I'm contrasting that and say, well, I've said this point, but in contrast, Buddhists would suggest this. They are peaceful people. If we start executing people, we're going to gain bad karma. That is not good. We're not going to break the cycle of samsara. Etc, etc. So we're going to explain it, and you might choose a point, say all of the positives and negatives, or contrast it with an opposing view, and then move on and look at other points. So how you do that, going backwards and forwards, is completely personal preference. Just make sure you're putting it in a structured way in paragraphs, and then your conclusion at the end. These are the things then that I think is really important for you to remember. There are 4 12-mark questions. They make up half the marks on each paper you sit, so you need to make sure you do them. Don't avoid them because they're the horrible ones. Practice them. Consider completing them first when you're in an exam scenario. Remember, don't get scared by the term evaluate. It just means that you're looking at the strengths and weaknesses, the pros and cons, the fors and againsts. It's the sort of thing you do all the time in life when you're making any decisions on something. So apply that to your written work. This is the big one then. If you do not make any reference to any religious teaching in your response, it doesn't matter how nicely structured it is, how many points you have included, how good your conclusion is, your mark will get capped at 6 out of 12. It's a religious studies exam. Make sure you are putting in that religious teaching, source of authority, reference, scripture, whatever. And this is the important part about the conclusion. You are not going to be given marks for a justified conclusion if you take something that you talked about earlier and regurgitate it. The examiner has already read that point. They've read why you agreed with it or disagreed with it. Don't then use it again in your conclusion. Try and include a completely different point that supports your overall view. Okay, I would say, especially later on in the course, revision is key, but throughout the course anyway. If you don't know what the question is asking you, if you don't know the topic, if you don't know what capital punishment is, for example, you can't answer the question effectively. So revise regularly. I always recommend little and often so you don't get bored, perhaps 20-minute sessions on a particular topic area. So you can do 20 minutes, have a break, 20 minutes, have a break, 20 minutes, and perhaps leave it there. Complete practice questions. The more you do this, the more prepared you will be for the final exam. And keep revisiting topics. Don't just get to the end and think, oh my goodness, I really didn't like looking at religion and life. I'm glad that's over. I'm not going to bother until I sit the exam. Regularly reviewing what you've learned will help you. I also highly recommend that you make a crib sheet with religious teachings and views on it. You could do this for each unit or theme. You could do it. I often tell students to highlight them in their books as they go along, and then at the end of a unit you can write them out on a separate sheet. Or you could just do it for the course as a whole and just keep adding to it, have a particular part, perhaps the back of your book or a different book that you put them in. But it's really useful to be able to revisit that when you're doing your revision and preparation for any question. Now, you can be really clever about this. You do not need to learn hundreds of different teachings by heart. You might be able to find a few key teachings that you can use in lots of units. So a prime example would be Jesus teaching us to love our neighbour. Okay, really impressive if you can say it's in the New Testament in Mark chapter 12 verse 31. But if you can just say Jesus taught, or it's recorded in the New Testament that Jesus taught that we should love our neighbour, you can apply that to so many different things. So perhaps write a teaching and then think about all the places you can apply it. That might be a useful exercise in itself. As I have said, one of the best things you can do is practice. So give it a go now. Allow yourself up to 15 minutes to write an answer to the statement, capital punishment is the only suitable punishment for murder. If you are not studying this theme, choose another suitable 12-mark question and give it a go. In the same way, plan it out, think of the points, think of the strengths and weaknesses, and then give it a go. As a teacher, I'm always happy to receive 12-mark practice questions from my students. So it doesn't just have to be your teachers. Speak to them, see if they will mark them. I'm sure they will do. But you can also self-mark. You can peer mark, so get your friends to mark them. You mark theirs, they mark yours. Use the mark schemes if you've got revision guides. Plenty of ways of seeing how you are doing, but just do it, just practice. That wasn't too bad, was it? So we're finally at the end. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked what you heard. Any feedback is always welcome. I'm always happy to learn, as you should be too. Let me know, what would you like help with next? Drop a comment below and I will do my best to create a suitable resource that can help you in your journey to gaining the best possible grade in your AQA GCSE Religious Studies exam. Bye.